2000. Eminem's Marshall Mathers LP sold 1.76 million copies in the first week. Second place was Jay-Z at 558,000 copies sold of The Dynasty. Outkast landed in third place selling 530,000 copies of Stank On. Snoop Dogg's Last Meal and Mystical's Let's Get Ready took the fourth and fifth spot. 2001. DMX's The Great Depression sold 439,000 units in the first week. In second place was Tupac, who had been dead for 5 years. Until the end of time, sold 427,000 copies. Jay-Z's classic album, The Blueprint, was third with 420,000 units moved. D12 landed in the fourth spot, and Ja Rule's Pain Is Love sold 361,000 copies, and that put him in the fifth spot. And people laugh at Ja Rule now, but he used to be one of the biggest artists out at one point. Nas, Lil Bow Wow, and Ludacris were all part of the top 10. 2002. Eminem sold 1,322,000 copies of The Eminem Show, giving him another number one placement and another platinum selling first week. Crazy. Nelly was number two with Nellyville selling 714,000 units. The 8 Mile soundtrack took third place. 8 Mile was a movie based on Eminem's life, so I guess he kind of took number 1 and 3. Jay-Z's Blueprint 2 sold 545,000 copies in the first week, and it was at number 4 for the best first week numbers in 2002. While he hasn't had the most first week sales of the years that we've talked about so far, he has placed in the top 5, dropping an album every single year. It is rare even today that someone sells 500,000 plus albums after just dropping the year before. Tupac, who at the time was dead for 6 years, snatched the 5th spot. That gives another top 5 album release after his death. This was a wild historic year for hip-hop. Eminem going platinum in the first week again, and a movie based on his life placing in the top 5. Jay-Z doubling back with a top 5 finish with part 2 of an album, and everyone knows that part 2s rarely ever live up to the first part. And Tupac, who was gone from this earth another year, getting a top 5 placement. And Ja Rule still landed in the top 10, number 7 to be exact, with 237,000 copies sold. 2003. 50 Cent made his debut with Get Rich or Die Trying, selling 872,000 copies in the first week. Now, if you were around when 50 Cent dropped this album, then you got to witness a complete takeover. 50 Cent became one of the biggest artists ever with this first album. That's ridiculous. He also had everyone wanting to wear bulletproof vests for fashion purposes too. Outkast dropped a double album titled Speaker Box and The Love Below. Big Boy was the Speaker Box half, and Andre 3000 was the Love Below half. It sold 510,000 copies in the first week, and they both had classic singles separately on the same album at the same time. At number 3 was Jay-Z yet again for the 4th year in a row dropped an album that placed in the top 5 first week sales, with the Black Album selling 463,000 in its first week. Not quite gold status, but in the first week it's still dope numbers. The Black Album is my favorite Jay-Z album, by the way. It was supposed to be his retirement album, but now we know we all came back. It's also the only retirement album that actually lived up to the hype, in my opinion. 2003 was another year without Tupac living, and yet again he had a top 5 release. He sold 430,000 copies of Resurrection in the first week. Ludacris came in at number 5 with Chicken and Beer, selling 429,000 copies in the first week. People also forget how Ludacris is one of the hardest out at this point. He has transitioned into acting, but he still has the bars to this day. 2004. Eminem's Encore sold 710,000 first week, giving him another year at the top. A drop off from going platinum in the first week, but still so close that if you were around when it dropped, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was a slight dip. Second was D12's D12 World, which sold 544,000 copies. And if you didn't know, D12 was Eminem's group, so he kind of took the first place and the second place. I don't know if you want to give it to him or not. At number 3 was a brand new artist named Kanye West, who dropped College Dropout, which sold 441,000 copies in the first week. And if you were around when this album dropped, then you would know why people have so much love for Kanye. He was just different, and it was his first classic. Lloyd Banks and Nelly rounded up the top 5. And Nelly dropped 2 albums at the same time. The second part of that double album reached the 8th spot. Tupac still placed in the top 10 with Loyal to the Game placing 9th. Man, he had a legendary career even after death. Most people don't even have that while alive. 2005. 2005 was a great year for classic hip-hop albums, and it had a lot of notable artists in the top 10. 50 Cent was still on fire with his first album, which led to his follow-up placing at the number 1 spot with The Massacre, selling 1.14 million copies in the first week. Kanye came in at number 2, selling 807,000 copies of Late Registration, another classic. Now, these placements will switch up in a couple years. The Game released his debut project titled The Documentary, which is a solidified classic. This landed him at number 3 with sales numbers of 586,000 copies sold. Eminem released the greatest hits album called Curtain Call, The Hits, and still placed top 5, coming in at number 4 with 441,000 copies of already released music being sold. That is crazy. Usually artists would only release greatest hits album after a couple decades, after them running the spotlight, or after they retire. This man did it 5 years after releasing his first project. so you know he had hella hits and a huge fan base. 50 Cent released a movie soundtrack titled Get Rich or Die Trying OST. That was also the title of the movie and his first album, but this soundtrack was a new project. Either way, it sold 317,000 copies in the first week, which placed 5th in 2005. This, just like Eminem's Greatest Hits album, was completely different from the norm. 6th place was reserved for another classic album. This was Lil Wayne's The Carter 2, and it sold 254,000 copies in the first week and went on to become double platinum. 2005 was a wild year for hip-hop, album-wise that is. 2006. Now 2006 marks the return of Jay-Z. Not only did he return, but he had the best first week numbers of the year with his Kingdom Come album selling 680,000 copies. T.I. is another name that returned near the top. King sold 522,000 copies in the first week. Same with The Game in his second album with the Doctor's Advocate, which sold 358,000 copies. The legend Nas checked in at number 4 with Hip Hop Is Dead selling 356,000 copies. Young Jeezy cracked the top 5 for the first time, even though he already had a couple classic albums and a couple classic mixtapes under his belt. Now what is surprising is the placement of Eminem. He dropped Eminem Presents The Re-Up, and it came in at number 6 on the first week sales. Although it was a compilation album, he usually hits number 1 or number 2 when he's a heavy player on any album. Now the placement doesn't mean the album flopped. It sold 309,000 in the first week and went on to reach platinum status. 2007. 07 seen the top 2 first week sales come from the same week release. The top 2 spots belong to Kanye and 50 Cent, just like 2 years prior to this. But this time Kanye West topped the charts with Graduation, the classic. It sold 957,000 copies. And in second place was 50 Cent, with Curtis selling 691,000 copies. This was a pivotal year because it was the year 50 Cent made sure to go head-to-head with Kanye. He proposed a bet that the loser of the first week sales would have to retire. And he lost by a wide margin, so he was supposed to retire. I'll tell you right now, that didn't happen. I don't think any rappers actually retired with the exception of Joe Budden. That dude just gotta be different. It's something that they have in him, and I don't believe it ever leaves. I mean, look at Jay-Z in the Black Album. He was supposed to retire after that, and he ended on a high note. But lo and behold, a couple years later, received a new project. Not that I'm mad about it. Speaking of Jay-Z, he dropped this year and had 4th best first week numbers, selling 426,000 copies, with T.I. coming in at the 3rd spot with 468,000 copies sold. 2008, Lil Wayne topped the charts this year with his Carter 3 selling 1,086,000 copies, which was almost double what the next artist did in the first week. Now, even though it was double, it wasn't bad because 568,000 copies sold, it still isn't a bad week, and that's exactly what T.I.'s Paper Trail album sold. Kanye West came in at number 3 with 450,000 copies sold of 808s and Heartbreak. Kanye changed his whole flow and sound with this album. He has changed with every album since. If I'm being honest, this was the first Kanye album that I didn't really like too much, and it's been that way with every other album since. Young Jeezy and The Game took 4th and 5th spots, respectively. 2009. Now, this was a slow year when it comes to first week number sales. Now, Eminem had a solid comeback outing, selling 608,000 copies of Relapse, and Jay-Z's Blueprint 3 sold 476,000 copies. After that, there was a steep drop-off. 50 Cent's Before I Self-Destruct came in at number 3, selling 160,000 copies in the first week. Now, 160,000 isn't that bad for a first week, but for 50 Cent, this was a huge drop-off. Right now, the album is at gold status, which is good, but not representative of the early impact 50 Cent had. 2010. Now, this year was full of heavy hitters. Eminem topped the charts once again by selling 741,000 copies of The Recovery, followed by Kanye's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which, again, a lot of people consider to be a classic, and it sold 496,000 copies. This year, we were also introduced to Drake and Nicki Minaj as far as albums go. Drake sold 447,000 copies of Thank Me Later, and Nicki Minaj sold 375,000 copies of Pink Friday. Both of these artists went on to have huge careers, as you'll see later. And if I'm not mistaken, this makes the first year for a female to be placed in the top 5 with the first week number sales. At the 5th spot was Lil Wayne, who sold 176,000 copies of Rebirth, which might seem low for somebody of his stature at the time, but the album was mostly rock music, so that kind of makes sense. 2011. After a long waited delay, Lil Wayne dropped the Carter 4 in 2011, and he sold 974,000 copies in the first week. His artist was right behind him with impressive numbers. That artist is Drake, and his project Take Care sold 631,000 copies. Watch the Throne by Jay-Z and Kanye sold 436,000 copies. Young Jeezy came in at number 4, and Jay-Z's artist J. Cole took the 5th spot, selling 217,000 copies of The Sideline Story. This marked the start of a legendary career for J. Cole album-wise. I mean, he already had a classic mixtape 2 in my opinion at that point. 2012. For the first time on this list, a woman hits the number 1 spot. Nicki Minaj dropped Pink Friday, Roman Reloaded, and sold 253,000 copies in the first week. Today, I think people forget how hot Nicki was. She was considered one of the best rappers in the game, not just one of the best female rappers in the game. And whether you like her or not, on a skill level, she deserves some respect. 2012 was also the debut year for Kendrick Lamar. well, at least album-wise. And he dropped mixtapes before this album that led to him having a huge fan base before the majority of the world even listened. Good Kid, Mad City sold 242,000 copies, and that placed him second for the year. Rick Ross won a third spot with God Forgives I Don't, selling 218,000 copies. Now, this was Ross's highest placement so far in his career, but he had a lot of dope projects and hits already. Kanye's label dropped a group album called Cruel Summer and sold 205,000 copies. And T.I. got the fifth spot. 2013. In 2013, Eminem got right back to it. The Marshall Mathers LP2 helped him get to the top spot yet again by selling 793,000 copies. Drake's Nothing Was the Same sold 658,000 copies, and Jay-Z sold 527,000 copies of Magna Carta Holy Grail. Kanye sold 328,000 copies of Yeezus, and J. Cole took the fifth spot with his sophomore album Born Sinner, selling 298,000 copies. Lil Wayne sold 217,000 copies of a mixtape called I Am Not a Human Being 2, and Wale's The Gifted sold 158,000 copies. Now, Wale is criminally slept on, and this project was one of my favorites of the year, and I still listen to it to this day. 2014. This was the year that Massa stopped sleeping on J. Cole. He dropped a classic in 2014. 2014, Forest Hill Drive sold 375,000 copies in the first week. Nicki Minaj, The Pink Print sold 244,000 copies in the first week, and Rick Ross cracked the top 5 again with his Mastermind selling 179,000 copies. Schoolboy Q also dropped the dope project Oxymoron, sold 139,000 copies in the first week. 2015 was Drake's year. He took the number 1 spot with If You're Reading This Too Late, selling 535,000 copies. And at the number 2 spot alongside with Future, he dropped What a Time to Be Alive, selling 375,000 copies. This was unheard of. 2 albums, number 1 and number 2. Kendrick Lamar added to his legacy with To Pimp a Butterfly, selling 363,000. Big Sean's Dark Sky Paradise had a decent first week, selling 173,000 copies, but that album definitely caught on after a little while and is now 2 times platinum. The reason I mention that is because before looking it up, I would have thought the first week numbers were higher based on the wide and great reception that project got. 2016, Drake decided that 2015 wasn't big enough, so he doubled back in 2016 and dropped Views. It sold over 1 million copies in the first week and firmly planted him at the top for the year. J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar took the second and third spots. J. Cole's For Your Eyes Only sold 492,000 copies, and Kendrick's Untitled Master sold 178,000 copies. Now, these names are regularly placed together when people talk about who's the best in the games, so it's actually dope to see them take the top 3 positions. Now, don't let Kendrick's first week numbers fool you. The album was just unreleased demos from his previous album. Otherwise, his numbers would have shot up higher. I'm surprised to see that Kanye West was near the bottom of the top 10, coming in at number 8 with Life of Pablo selling 94,000 units. But I do remember the tour that went along with the album being one of the most talked about tours of the year, and his merch being resold for a crazy amount. Despite those non-Kanye-like first week album sales, the album did end up going double platinum. Third place, we have a Tribe Called Quest selling 135,000 copies of We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service. Damn, that is a long ass title. This surprised me because even though they are a legendary group, they didn't have the appeal to the younger crowd, which is who mostly decides what artists are hot. So even though they got the third place, they actually really have the most impressive album to me. This era wasn't designed for them to succeed commercially, and they did it anyways. 2007. Kendrick took the top spot in 2017. Damn sold 603,000 copies in the first week. Drake placed second with 505,000 units of More Life being moved. Would have been interesting to see where J. Cole would have placed during this year, but he took this one off. Eminem took the number 3 spot with Revival, moving 267,000 units. And his old chart battle buddy, Jay-Z, was right behind him with 262,000 units of 444 being moved. Logic took the 5th spot with his album Everybody, moving 247,000 units. 2018. Drake decided that he wanted that top spot back and dropped Scorpion and moved 732,000 units in his first week. Travis Scott dropped Astro World and sold 537,000 copies. That album, along with the tour, made Travis Scott a household name. Not too long ago, he was in some hot water, but back then, Travis was on fire. After a lot of drama and delays, Lil Wayne finally dropped the Carter 5, and it sold 480,000 copies in the first week. Eminem grabbed the 5th spot with Kamikaze selling 434,000 units. Cardi B dropped her debut album and it moved 255,000 units in the first week. She is the first female rapper to crack the top 10 since Nicki Minaj did it in 2014. 2019 saw Post Malone take the top spot. Now, some people feel he isn't a true hip-hop artist, but I think differently. I just view him as hip-hop based, but not boxed in. He is also always feature-heavy on the hip-hop side. Even with that being said, his album has a rock-like name. It's called Hollywood's Bleeding, and it sold 489,000 copies in the first week. Kanye West is back up near the top of the list. He placed number 2 with Jesus is King, selling 264,000 copies. Tyler, the Creator, sold 165,000 in the first week in a head-to-head matchup with DJ Khaled, who also sold 136,000 copies in that same week. 2020. The late great Juice WRLD, RIP, took the top spot in 2020. Legends Never Die sold 497,000 copies in the first week. Before he passed, Juice WRLD was on his way to becoming a megastar, but sadly his life was cut short. Lil Uzi Vert placed second with The Long Awaited Eternal Would Take, and it sold 288,000 copies. Eminem also dropped another project titled Music to Be Murdered By, and it sold 279,000 copies in the first week. Another star in the making was sadly not able to see his album being released to the world. Pop Smoke was killed before Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon could be released, but that didn't stop it from selling 251,000 units in the first week. That got him the number 4th spot in 2020. Drake took the 5th spot with a random project called Dark Lane Demo Tapes, and it moved 223 units in the first week. 2021. 2021 saw Drake add another point to his score. He released Certified Lover Boy and it sold 613,000 copies in the first week, giving it top honors for first week sales. Kanye's Donda took the 2nd place position with 309,000 units being sold. Kanye was followed by J. Cole and his The Off-Season Project, which sold 282,000 copies in the first week. Tyler, the Creator, placed 3rd, and Lil Baby and Durk collabed to take the 5th spot. 2022. In 2022, Drake and 21 Savage dropped Her Loss, which sold 404,000 copies in the first week. That was more than enough to give it the number 1 spot. After taking a 5-year break, Kendrick Lamar decided to drop another album called Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, which sold 295,000 copies, giving it the number 2 spot. Future's I Never Liked You came in a close 3rd, selling 222,000 copies. Lil Baby's It's Only Me sold 216,000 in the first week. Drake placed 5th with Honestly Nevermind, selling 204,000 copies in the first week. 2023 is halfway through, and we have Lil Durk leading the year, selling 125,000 copies of Almost Healed. At number 2, we have NF selling 123,000 copies of Hope. I'm not going to lie, I don't know any of his music except for maybe a couple songs that I've heard out like on the radio on public or something, but people seem to really fuck with it. Spideyverse movie soundtrack, which was put together by super producer Metro Boomin, sold 66,000 copies in the first week. NBA Youngboy, aka Youngboy Never Broke Again, dropped Don't Try Me at Home and sold 60,000 in week 1. And at number 5, we have Trippie Redd selling 56,000 copies of Mansion Music in the first week. Again, this is only halfway through 2023, so this list will look a little different at the end.